All right, it's 5 o'clock, so I guess we'll get started. Okay, well, I'll just introduce myself first. I'm Hope. I work at MGI, and I'm going to be telling you about how to write an Angular web app today. So I want to make sure like everyone is able to totally follow along. So if anyone has questions throughout, or if you're not understanding a part of it, feel free to message. And hopefully Stephen will stop me and we can make sure everyone's understanding. So the goal of this presentation is what do you do if you have a great LabVIEW Web Service that works well, and maybe you're thinking about writing an NXG Web VI or something, but if you have like a really specific user interface requirement, or you just want, you want something to be a little bit more nice or modern than LabVIEW NXG can give you, then you can use Angular and write your own web app. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you guys kind of just from the ground up how you could write an app, and I'm going to try and do some things live because I think that'll help you understand better how to do it. So if you were going to do this on your own, the first things you would need to install is you need to install Node.js. And once you have Node.js installed, then you can use it. Node.js comes with NPM, which allows you to install packages. So you can use that to install the Angular CLI by just running this command. In your command line. And then once you have those two things installed, you're ready to get started. So for example, you can just go ahead and type in your command line, ng new smart house example. So for our example website, we're going to pretend we had like a LabVIEW controller that's controlling like some kind of smart house system, right? You wrote LabVIEW code to control your thermostat, or maybe your refrigerator, different things around your house, and then you want a web app to monitor that. So that's what we'll do as an example. Yeah.
Do you want to change your scaling so they can see those a little better?
Oh yeah, thanks. Let me do that. I don't know why it does that. That's my Arabic teacher. You guys can enjoy that. Okay, there we go. Perfect. And I don't know, why does this thing always come up? Nope, that's just gonna do that. All right. PowerPoint. Okay. Great. All right, so let's run this command. It's going to ask us if we want to add Angular routing. I'm just going to say no for now because I don't want to get into that. I think it'll sort of slow down. But in reality, you'd probably want to say yes to routing, but we're not going to go over it today. And then I just said we'll use CSS for our styling, which you'll learn about later. Okay, so I'm going to let that run for a little bit. And also, just so you know, if you go to this link here on the Angular website, it will give you a whole guide about like running these commands and like more about what they do. So if you were going to make a web app, you would probably want to go here. Okay, so now I'll explain a bit more about what exactly Angular is. So Angular is a framework for writing front-end web apps. So just kind of the user interface of your web app. And what Angular does is the framework provides an easy way to have two-way binding between variables in your JavaScript code and the display of those variables in HTML. So if you didn't know, the web usually is based on like HTML pages with JavaScript running behind them. So Angular means that in HTML, oh, Stephen. In HTML, you can write how things are going to be displayed, and then you can link that to your code in the JavaScript where you're like doing stuff with those variables. also the cool thing about Angular is there's a lot of pre-made components for Angular. So even if you're not a UX designer, you can just use some pre-made components from Google Material, and they'll look really nice. You can just, you can just use them. You don't have to make them yourself. So as for how you use Angular with LabVIEW, since this is a LabVIEW summit technically, what you do is you can write your LabVIEW web service in LabVIEW, and then your Angular app uses the LabVIEW Web Service to get all of the data that it's going to display. Or it could also send data to the LabVIEW Web Service if you wanted to control something remotely. So just kind of example. So you have your LabVIEW Web Service. The NI application server would be what's running that. Or I think new in 2020, there's like a new application server, but it's basically the same thing. And then your web app, the Angular CLI, at least in our debugging mode, is what's going to be like running your web app. And so then they'll talk to each other over HTTP. Okay, so let's get back to our code. Oh, great, it's finished. So what that did is it just created a bunch of files for us, and we can open them up and look at them. Here we are. So it created a bunch of files for us with sort of some placeholder stuff in it. And if we want to see what this beginning website that we have would look like, we can actually run it as well. So if we just use this command ngserve, we can see what it will look like, what the default Angular website looks like. Oh, I have to be in the right directory. It's just gonna build and compile it for us, and then it'll host it locally. Come on, it's gonna take a while. There you go. Okay. So here's what our first website looks like. It's basically just a bunch of documentation for Angular, but you can tell it looks nice. Like there's those little functions so you can click on stuff. But that's what it looks like. We're going to delete most of that code and write our own code now. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about what all the different files that were created are, because we were looking at them a little bit. So let me explain the differences of them. So remember, these are all our files here that were created for us when we ran that Angular command. So first, there's an HTML file. We already kind of know web code, or like web coding means you're going to have some HTML, and that defines the structure and the layout of like all of your components. Then there's this component.ts file. So this is the TS here stands for Typescript. It's basically the same thing as JavaScript. So this is your JavaScript file basically. And that's where you define the logic. So the variables and the functions that are going to be running in sort of the behind part of your web app. And why it's TypeScript instead of JavaScript, it's really just the same thing, but JavaScript is not a strictly typed language. So, like in LabVIEW, if you have like a numeric control, you can't wire that into a string indicator because they're not the same type. And LabVIEW is strictly typed. But in JavaScript, there's not that same kind of strict typing. It doesn't like force everything to be the correct type. So TypeScript is just kind of a thing on top of that lets you specify what type each thing is. And then it will do some checking, like in your IDE, if you're using the wrong type, it will yell at you, so you know that you're making a mistake. So these two, the HTML and the Typescript file, are the most important files that we're going to be working with. There's also a CSS file, and that's where you can define some of the styling, like what colors or what fonts you want to use. And then there's also this spec file. We're not going to talk about that today. It would be used for testing if you wanted to have like testing, automatic testing of your web app. All right, so let's get started writing some code. I'm just gonna actually go over this so we can do it live. I think it'll be easier. Also, let's get rid of these warnings. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna learn about is what's called template expressions. And template expressions are a way of doing the 2D binding that I was talking about between variables in JavaScript and those same variables in HTML. So first we need to create a variable in our Typescript file. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a variable called controllers. We can have it just be an empty array for now. This is going to be an array of all of the controllers in my smart house system. So like if I have a thermostat, a refrigerator, all of my different controllers. So that's my variable there. And then in HTML, I'm going to use that variable using a template. So this is all the pre-made stuff that Angular came with us. So as it says, it's just a placeholder, so I'm just going to delete it and add my own stuff. If you're not familiar with HTML, I'm just making an ordered list, basically. Padding is all messed up. So I'm just making an ordered list. So I'm saying, okay, let's display to the user controller number 1. And we're going to do, the first element in our controllers array. We'll say its name. And then, the second element in our controllers array. So these brackets here, these brackets mean that I'm putting JavaScript code inside the bracket. So that's how I'm able to index this array, just like I normally would in JavaScript, even though it's inside my HTML page. Okay, so we have our template expression, and we have a variable here, but it's not very interesting. We don't have any actual data. So to start with, I'm just going to use some simulated data. So I'm just going to copy some files that I already defined. Here we go. I'm just going to copy these, and we'll open them up here so you can see them. Why did it do that? Okay, so I have some sample data, just so we can use this really quick, that has some controllers just already set out for me. So, a thermostat with a specific description, a fridge, just these things. And then here in my types, I'm just defining what this interface is. So this is like in LabVIEW, if I had a type def, like defining what elements were in my cluster. This is just a cluster with certain elements defined here. And then, yeah, this is just some sample data. So I'm just going to go ahead and import these in this VI here. So there they are. So now I'm going to set the controllers equal to this sample controllers value. And because I'm using Typescript, I can actually say what type this variable is. I can just give it a little bit of extra type safety. So I'm just going to say this variable is a controller array, actually. And again, this part is totally optional. I could delete it and the code would still function the same, but that's just there for some type safety. And let's try running this and see what happens. So the cool thing about, I told you that the Angular CLI is what's actually compiling and running this code. It checks for when you save files. So when you save a file, it will actually recompile it. So it's been recompiling it for us. So it should be running right now, actually. Here we go. Oh, perfect. Here's our list of items. And we just did the first two. And there they are. I'm assuming, does anyone have any questions? All right. I don't see.
World example.
Yep.
World, though.
Okay, so just so you know kind of what the CSS does, in CSS you can kind of specify if you want to like a class, and then for a certain class you can specify like properties that you want, like if we want some padding or something. So we can do that real quick. We say in here, we just want this to all be inside this. So, and then if we go into the CSS, we can define a class. We could add padding here, or we could add like a certain font type, whatever you'd want to do there. Okay, so the next thing, this is what I'm sure you guys are all most excited about. How do we actually interact with LabVIEW? So I have a LabVIEW Web Service that I created for this example. No, that's pain relief. That's coming up. Nope. Oh, that's because this. Here it is. Great. So I have this little web service, and we'll just focus on this method here, get controllers. What I'm doing is when you're working with Angular, a lot of times you'll have issues with what's called cores. It's like a security thing because it's going across like, yeah, it's like a cross origin thing. Anyway, what I'm doing here is I'm just saying accept the request. This is probably not the most secure thing to do because with the star, I'm just saying accept any request, always accept it. But if you want to be more secure, you could like actually put where the origin you're expecting the request to come from. So that allows it to work. If you're doing Angular and it's just not working, it just keeps like rejecting and refusing to communicate over HTTP, it's probably because you're not doing this. So that's an important thing to know. And then all I'm doing right here is I just have a global variable. It's my simulation data, and I'm just writing it to JSON and sending it to my Angular web app. Normally, of course, I would never use global variables, but when you're doing a web service, you have to use some type of global, whether it's a global variable, a named queue, something like that. So, you know. Right, so let's run this. What? Oh. I must have renamed it. Oh yeah, I did. There we go. That's weird. Oh yeah, and like I said, this start and stop, this is like the new NI web service thing, but I'm just using the old version. So yeah, I'm not sure about the new version yet. Okay, so that's running. So now let's talk about how we use this web service from Typescript. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is we need to import some HTML stuff. I'm going to import this Angular HTML toolkit that I need. And then I need to have that injected into me when I start up. Right? So when I start up, I want to have like this HTML client that I can use. So in order to do that, I'm just going to implement this on init function in my component. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not too confusing. So we have this on init. This is basically just what we need to do so that you can call a function or do anything as soon as your app starts up, or like whenever your user refreshes the page, that's when this is going to get called. And then we also want to have a constructor. This is what's going to give us the HTTP client so that we can use it. And we also have to add another little thing in order to get this HTTP client to be provided to us here. We're also going to need to import it in here as well, in that module. So we just import HTML here, and we want to declare it as one of our imports. So doing this means that it will get put into us here, and then we can use it. And it's also sort of a shortcut. I'm going to be able to use this HTTP thing. Here, I'll show you. Here. I'm going to use it here, this.http, but you can see I didn't define it here. I didn't define anywhere like HTTP equals. And that's just because it's sort of a shorthand. When it's put in here, it automatically gets put in as a private data of your class. Okay. So let's get to, this is the real meat of it. How do we call an HTML or like do an HTML request with our web service? Okay. So I'm just defining here as a constant the URL to my example web service. Obviously, in reality, you'd probably not do this because it would be an actual public web service. But that's just what I'm doing here. And then what I'm doing is I'm using the HTTP object that I got injected into me. And I'm doing an HTTP get on the base URL. And then this is the name of my like command. You can see in LabVIEW, it's the same name here. And it's the same name you have set up. Like if you go, if you show the method URL, right? This is the URL that I'm trying to talk to, and that's the same thing, right? This is the base, and then this is what I'm adding on to it. Okay, so this is the most important thing that you want to know about with talking to web services from Angular is this .subscribe thing. So the reason that we use this .subscribe is because this request is actually running asynchronously. So by using .subscribe, what we're saying is do this request, and I don't know how long it's going to take. It might take a while, but once it finally finishes, once you get the answer back from the web service, then do this. So this is not going to run synchronously. If I wrote another command after this, if I called some function here, it could actually get executed before this code get executed. In fact, it most likely would, because this isn't going to get executed until the command finishes. And that's actually good because it's going to make sure that like there's not lag in our website while we're waiting for the web service to respond to us. Okay, and then what are we doing? It's super simple what we're doing here. It gives us the result, which the result is that thing that I sent in JSON, right? So it's going to be this. Well, it's not executed. So it gives us that result, and I'm just putting that into my variable this dot controllers. So I don't need to set it to the sample controllers anymore because I'm setting it to the controllers that I get from the web service. So let's see if this is working. I hope it is. Oh, look, it's working. So we can see for the status for the web from the web service, I just put in like whatever data it has in it. So you can actually see that it's getting it from the web service, because if I refresh it, you can see the data is changing a little bit. And that I'm just changing it like randomly in my web service. So that's how you do that.
Open concurrently. So this is really, really cool. This is a really big feature. And just to reiterate here, you can see that I'm working.
Yeah.
Okay.
we'll just call it technical glitches.
All right. Well, okay. So now you're probably wondering, like, you don't want to just do it once on NG init. You probably want to get data from your web service like every so often, every few seconds or every second. So I'll show you how to do that. It's actually also super easy. So all we need to do is this. We just call this set interval function. And we're basically just telling it, hey, every 2,000 seconds, do this. So, or not every 2,000, every 2,000 milliseconds. So like every 2 seconds, call this function. So that way it's just gonna, every 2 seconds, it'll call this function and we'll get new data from the web service. So it's really starting to look like a good web app. It's like actually, I have too many things, too many windows. There we go. So now you can see it's gonna actually update for us. Amazing. It still looks ugly, but we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that because obviously that's the point. We want it to be beautiful. It has the functionality now. Oh, and here's another functionality we really want to have. So you're probably thinking, it's pretty annoying that we have to do this manually, right? I have to write a list element for every controller that I want to show, right? Number 0, number 1. And I have 3 of them. I'm not even showing all of them, right? I'd have to do another one if I wanted to do another one. Controller number 3. Oh, and look, I even had a bug right here, right? This needs to be 1, this needs to be 2, right? Obviously, this is not a sustainable solution. We need to do something better. And of course, there is. You can use a for loop, just like you would in LabVIEW. But this time it's a for loop in your HTML code, and it's called NG for. NG stands for Angular. So what we can do is, yeah, right here, we're going to do NG for. And what this means here, let controller of controllers. It means we have this controller array. It's basically like a for each loop. So for each controller in our array of controllers. And just in case, I also want to have my index I. It's actually not really necessary in this case because controller, we can just use controller, right? So instead of controller, you could do controllers of index I if we wanted to, or we don't even need to. We can just say controller because that's what we've defined here. So we don't even need this.
Right. Missing a dot in that controller status.
Thanks. Oh yeah, here, I think the reason I wanted to have it was we can put it here. We just want to say which controller they're looking at. Let's see what we've got now. Oh, I still so there we go. Now we have all 3 controllers, and if we added a 4th or a 5th or however many in our LabVIEW Web Service, they would all show up here. Amazing. Okay, so now we've got, oh good, we still have half an hour left to talk about how to make it pretty. So To make it pretty, you probably want to use Material Angular, which is Google made these, so you know it has to be good. What? Why? Okay. So here's just some examples. You can see all of the pre-made components they have. They're all super nice looking, right? You can have like a nice like autocomplete if you want to like start typing. Or you could have a nice like, I think they have a calendar, a date picker. Right? They have a bunch of cool things. We're going to use this one, the expansion panel. And that's just going to let us, instead of this ugly sort of list of items with all this data on the side, we're going to just put them into expansion panels where the user can click and see the data that they want for each one. So sort of a simple way of displaying data in a nice way. So what we need to do for this is we need to install the components. Those. And you can see they're going to show up here. It's not installed yet. It's installing them. They're going to show up here once they get installed. And then remember, just like we imported the HTTP stuff, we're going to need to import them here as well so that we can use them. So import. Well, is it finished yet? Oh, we have to pick it. You can pick a theme. You can choose from like a few different colors, or you can make your own. We'll just stick with this one. Sure. Installing. There we go. Okay, now you can see it. We have all this extra stuff installed now. Great. So, oh, and it already imported some of the stuff here for us. We want to import the expansion module. That's the one I was just showing you. So we're going to import that, and then we also want to add it to this list of imports here. Okay, and then we are going to add it in here as well. So just going to this. All right, so maybe it seems like I put a whole different code in here, but it's really very similar to what we had before. All I'm doing is I have this Mqtt accordion, which is if you go in here where we're looking, you can even just see the examples as they have here. So you can really just copy this code. You use a Mqtt accordion and then the Mqtt expansion panel. This corresponds with this whole part correspond, or yeah, so the title corresponds with like what you see here. The description corresponds with like what you see here. And then the content inside would be like what you see when you open it up. So we've got the same thing here. So we're doing an expansion panel and we're doing one for every controller, right? This NG4 for each controller in controllers. And then so for each one, we have the panel header, which has our title. We're doing the template expression just exactly like we were doing before. And then the panel description, same thing. We're just using this template expression. And then here, this is the body of it. So again, we're just using a template expression just to show that status. So it's really the same thing we had before. I'm just putting it in with these pre-built components. And let's see what it looks like. We do need to rerun this because I stopped it when I added that. Come on. Still compiling. All right. Beautiful. Okay, it may not look great yet, but you can tell, you know, we're using this. We could probably use some padding. I'm not sure actually why my padding isn't working. It should be being padded. I don't know. Maybe I wrote something wrong there, but you can see the basic idea. So one annoying thing that's happening is, you know how we're updating it every 2 seconds? So that means every 2 seconds it's sort of like redrawing the whole thing. It's not very user-friendly, but there's actually a simple fix for that. It's called track by. So because we are in here, we're changing this controllers thing every 2 seconds, right? We're updating it. That means it's refreshing this whole thing every time. But if we tell this that we want it to just track by the controller's name, then we're basically telling it, hey, even if I update it, if it has the same name, don't refresh the page, because it's still the same thing. So I'm just telling it to do that, and then I'm just defining that function here. So we just use the name as like a unique identifier for each controller. In reality, maybe you'd have something more complicated. Maybe you have like a GUID or something that uniquely identifies it. But for us, the name is fine. Okay, so let's see if that works a little bit better. Amazing, it does. So now we can click on this. We can see the data changing. And there we go. Beautiful. Okay, so now I was sort of building this from the ground up with you guys, but now I'm just going to switch over to sort of the cake that I've already put into the oven, sort of the pre-built one, just so you can see some of the other cool things that we might not have time to go through from scratch together. So let me just reopen that. And this way I'll show you kind of some of the things that are a bit more complicated that you'd probably want to do.
So
Mm-hmm.
we have a question. We have a question about whether or not we could transfer data with Mqtt instead of web services. I'm not familiar with that.
I don't know what Mqtt is, but if you can have an HTTP protocol with it, then yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's probably something set up for that.
Yeah, I'm guessing you can. Let's see.
So there was another question about deploying the Angular web server to a website, you know, and then how you connect that website to your LabVIEW. You know, obviously, you know, you're gonna have to host publicly or internally, like the LabVIEW Web Service, so that the web application, the Angular web server, can talk to it. And there's a lot of examples. Yeah, I mean, that's what we did. We had something internal on a closed network that was posting information that was then getting eaten by the Angular web service and deployed outside of their network so that people can see it.
Yeah, you can do that. Like, so you can build your Angular web app, and then you can just put it on like whatever your server is, like ISS or whatever. And then, yeah, if you don't want your LabVIEW web service to be accessible to the public, well, you can do things like you can say have it only accept traffic from the web app itself, or or you might need to have like a intermediate web service that goes between them that everyone can connect to.
There's a lot of setup things, you know, depending on how your network is set up and stuff, but it's doable.
Okay, so let's run this this thing here. All right, well, it's building. Okay, great. So here's our more completed app. Basically, instead of just displaying that status that had all the data mushed together in one string, we can display it as like a nice table here. So I'll show you how that works. And we can update these so that like they turn colors if they're out of limits of the alarm. It's pretty easy to do that. So what I'm doing here, you'll notice I have a few different components. So instead of just writing everything like we did in the example in this app.component.ts file, I actually have 3 different components that each have their own component.ts file. So this one doesn't really have anything in it. It just controls the top bar, this thing here. So it just lets you switch between these 2 things. And this is the routing that Angular has. So then we have the overview. It doesn't really do anything in the TypeScript either because it's just a bunch of text. And then the main component is this details view. So it's nice to separate things out this way because that way you can be reused. So I don't know. So you know, if I wanted to reuse this whole module somewhere else, because it's as its own separate component, I could put this in somewhere else in my Angular app and just reuse it.
It's equivalent to your sub VIs in LabVIEW, of course.
Exactly. Well, it's sort of the equivalent of like a sub panel in LabVIEW, because there's another thing we're going to learn about that's the equivalent of sub VIs, or they're both like sub VIs. Yeah. So let's see. I'll show you how I did the tables. It's really pretty simple. I just create a table, and then you just define what all the columns are. These are just statically defined, but you could dynamically define your columns by using an ng for loop here for your table columns. And then here I'm using ng for each item in the items of that controller, and then I'm just making a table for that, using again the template expressions for each row in the table. And then here I'm using ng style to set the color. So I just have a function of my item that tells me what color it's supposed to be. It's pretty simple. It just checks if the alarm is triggered. It just checks if like the value is within the limits. And if it's a critical alarm, it says it's red, otherwise it's orange, otherwise it's black. And so then we run that there to get the color of it. So yeah, and then for the table, this is another like CSS thing, right? So I'm setting its class to be table hover, and that's a predefined CSS thing. So I don't have to define that. I'm just setting it to be that class, and that is making it so that when I hover over it, it changes color, which is kind of nice. Okay, so the last thing that you want to know about, you'll definitely want to use this if you're going to be doing a lot of communicating with LabVIEW Web Services, is Angular services. An Angular service, I think, is like the equivalent of a sub VI in LabVIEW, because this lets you encapsulate code. So a component lets you encapsulate like a whole sort of HTML plus TypeScript module. The service just lets you encapsulate like a TypeScript piece of code, basically. So I'll show you the service that I'm using, or that I created. So I created this service here, and it basically does the same thing that we were doing here in get controllers, right? I'm doing this HTTP get. I'm not doing subscribe because, well, let me explain what a service does. So let me show you where I'm using it. Okay, so here in get controllers, instead of doing the HTTP request directly, I'm using this service that I created, right? Data service, the same thing here. I'm using this data service and I'm subscribing to it. So the data service itself, that means it's running asynchronously. And when the service finishes, then it will get back to me with this result. And then I do whatever my code is on it. So in this service, I don't actually have to subscribe because I don't need to run the code here in the service. I'm just going to do it when it gets back to it here. So with this pipe, I'm basically saying, hey, whenever you finish giving me this result of this HTTP request, then pipe it through this, do this function on it, and then send it to whoever's subscribed to it. It's just kind of piping it through that. So the benefit of this service is, first of all, if I have a bunch of different pages, right, I could totally add more pages here that show different views of my data. And I would totally want to use the same web service. So in that way, I could just use that exact same service and I wouldn't have to rewrite that HTML code. It's also nice because this service, I'm strictly typing it. So here I'm saying it returns an array of controllers. If you'll remember before when we were doing the HTTP, we were just kind of saying, hey, it returns something because we can't be sure exactly what. But in the service, I'm saying, no, that's what I'm promising that I'll return. And this observable thing, that just means it's going to return a controller eventually, a controller that you can subscribe to once it finishes the request. The observable is just something you subscribe to. The other great thing about using a service is, let's say I'm doing some testing and I don't have access to my LabVIEW Web Service, or maybe I haven't written it yet and I still want to make sure that everything works. I just did this little example. If you turn this to true, then it will just use sample data instead of from the web service. You can see, for example, here. Notice the data is not changing because it's just sample data. But if I turn this on, or if I turn this off, now the data starts changing again because it's actually getting it from the web service. So that's just in here. I'm saying, hey, if I'm supposed to use sample data, just return the sample data. If not, then actually return it from the web service. So yeah, so that's how services work. Let's see, other cool things I can show you. Yeah, I showed you the tables. That's basically it. Does anyone have questions? Oh, I haven't used that, but actually I plan to use it in the future or something like that. Or it seems good. I haven't used it personally yet though.
Yeah, I think one of the main advantages about jumping into this, like it's a little bit difficult at the start, but you have lots of examples, lots of people using it, so it's really easy to find a good working example code of what you want things to look like, and then you can just kind of...
Yeah, that's the really amazing thing about it. Like, it's so easy to find examples. Like, you just go on here, and I mean, Angular material doesn't have everything that you might want, but if you find one of these that you like, it shows you exactly how to use it. It's super nice. Oh, and let me give you a link to the code so you guys can look at it as well. This can be an example for you. If you go to that link, you can download the code. And there is Ionic, which is like Angular for mobile development. sounds good. I haven't used that, but sounds interesting. Oh yeah, since we have time, I can also show you about routing, which was something I skipped. People don't have more questions. Routing.
Well, we're actually supposed to be done 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well,
if you could do it in a couple minutes.
Well, here's the routing. You basically you can specify like, right, like here's where I said, oh, my details view is this component, and blah, blah, blah. And then over in my top bar, I'm saying like, okay, each of these links, this links to the details view. So it's actually pretty simple. But you use the routing so that you can select between these two different pages that you want to see. So yeah, all right.
Routing is your sub panel insert.
Exactly. All right, well, I guess we're good. I don't know, I guess we can go to a breakout room, but it doesn't look like anyone has questions, so.
Yeah, feel free to contact either of us, either through the hop-in direct message thing if you want, or, you can go to moregoodideas.com and send us emails if you have questions or anything. So mainly contact us.
Yeah.
I'm just here for support.
So, oh, thanks, Henry. Yeah, I hope you guys are able to make cool apps. It's pretty fun. All right, well, yeah, I guess we'll leave now. Bye, everyone.
Have fun. Keep enjoying it. We'll be back for the 7x7, both of us.
Yes.
Well, she has 2.
Yeah. So three between us. Yeah. All right. Bye, guys.